Good afternoon, everybody. And gentlemen, welcome to this session. It's good to see everybody. So we are going to be talking about data-driven financial services within trade. And I have 4 gentlemen with me from different companies working in different aspects. They will be sharing all the information now. So I'm going to start with Nitin. Please introduce yourself, what your company does for a few minutes.
Thank you, Martha. I am Nitin Mishra. I am CTO for ONDC, which is Open Network for Digital Commerce. We are actually we are working on something which is a paradigm shifting, innovation around, creating network of e-commerce, or rather internet of e-commerce. Typically, if you look at a typical e-commerce evolution, it has evolved in form of platforms. We are decluttering that by decentralizing and deplatformizing, the commerce by writing standards and interoperable framework where the distinct participants with distinct value chain can interact and transact with each other. So that's what ONDC is all about.
Thank you. Next, Jeremy.
Hi, my name is Jeremy. I'm a CEO of a company called Liquid Group. We do 2 things essentially. We are a gateway service provider, but more specific for this forum, we are an account services provider. So what we mean is we operate onshore accounts for offshore companies. So specific to this topic, data is a massive, massive concern for us. We want to collect as much data as possible for our screening. This is because it supports our business of account services in Singapore. Thank you.
Ndungu.
Good morning, all. My name is Ndungu Thairu, Deputy Managing Director, Consolidated Bank Ghana. We are a mass market and SME-based bank. And in the last 2 years, we've been working with Monetary Authority of Singapore and Proxtera to try and tidy up data, bring digitalization for purposes of a trusted financial corridor between Singapore and Ghana.
Good afternoon, everybody. For everybody from out of Singapore, welcome to Singapore. I hope you guys enjoy the Singapore FinTech Festival. I'm Saurav. I'm the CEO of Proxtera. Proxtera was a company that was set up with the interest of Monetary Authority of Singapore and Infocom Media Development Authority with 2 aspects. One is to help SMEs get financing, and 2 is them to be trusted and verifiable at a global stage. Simply put, if all SMEs come to global markets, then trade resilience will be helped a lot. So we are helping solve that problem. And whilst we are here, Proxtera is right there. So if you haven't been to the booth, please go right after. Thank you.
Yeah, nice marketing for you. Yeah, so Nitin, I'll start with you. You work for, your initiative is by the government, right? By the government of India. So how does the network help Indian businesses expand their reach and access new markets? And what does data, so it's a 2 question, and what does data have, play a role in this?
Sure, Martha. So, one of the so ONDC, everyone that I speak to, and I start talking about ONDC, and I always see there is a mystery around ONDC. Is it a platform? Is it a network? Is it a node? What is it? I think we keep on saying, and as much as it has become a cliched statement now, we are actually a network, right? Now, what does a network do? And if I have to fall back on the most convenient example to explain what a network does, is basically how email ecosystem evolved, right? The first email server was basically installed in a particular institute where everybody had their inboxes on the same email server, right? But then was there a possibility for this email server to talk to another email server? It was not possible till the time SMTP came into existence, which is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. What SMTP did was, you can have your email inbox on, let's say, Hotmail, and you can always send an email back to the Gmail. This is exactly what we are trying to solve, right? The SMTP, which is equivalent of a protocol for an email ecosystem, in ONDC, we use something called beacon. Now, beacon is a transactional layer protocol. It's a higher level protocol, on a network stack. What we are doing is we are defining standard and protocol for a framework of a transaction, of a digital transaction, right? A user can be sitting on one platform which provides specific buyer-related services, for example. They don't have to worry about any inventory or catalog management or anything. But then there are specialists who manage catalog, who specialize in catalog management, can actually provide those services to the buyer app, which can then further render these services back to the buyers, right? Similarly, logistics is another important chain, right, which is also on the network, but not co-located with either the buyer app or the seller app. There are elements on the network. People can go find somebody who can deliver this product from one location to another. In order to facilitate this transaction, ONDC is responsible for defining standards, protocols, and specifications, using which a digital transaction in a grammatical sense takes place. So that is what ONDC is all about. Government of India has given us a mandate to look at including tier 3, tier 4, and the tribal areas of the country to bring their producers onto the digital market and create wider access for those market ecosystems.
And how does data play in that? I mean, the importance of data, because what you don't measure, you can't really explain. So how are you getting access, or how are you collecting the data, and how are you using that to enable SMEs to access new markets?
So the moment you talk about data, I think the construct that comes to your mind is of a platform. ONDC as an organization is not a platform. We are not acting as a switch. We are enabling peer-to-peer transactions, right? So there are specialized network nodes or the platforms like buyer apps. A classic example could be any e-commerce like Amazon and all, who could only serve the buyers. They will ensure that the catalog that is coming from their sellers are rendered properly and shown it to the to their respective buyers. They don't really have to talk to anybody centrally. The only digital asset that ONDC owns today is a registry, which is nothing but hardly a few MB worth of a database that only provides discovery of items. And once the discovery is done, a typical like a DNS server, right? When you try and access an email server, the DNS server is only called once, and after that, every other transaction is peer-to-peer. So there is no data per se which is central. However, the ecosystem in itself can actually collaborate and create data, data intelligence and data sources to create efficiency in the market.
Thank you.
Can I
Yeah,
add on to that? Is that okay? So what we're talking about here, what Nitin also explained, is something that Proxtera also believes in. We're talking about walled gardens. Essentially, all e-commerce platforms today work with the buyers and sellers within the same ecosystem, one ecosystem only. Now, they don't interoperate with each other. If we apply this to the fintech space or the banking space, it can simply be called as open banking. We know there are lots of forward steps in that, but open banking is really not there for SMEs yet, so from the business perspective, in most countries. Singapore is strides ahead. Many countries have gone ahead with it, but most countries are still trying to implement it. So before we even get into data-driven, what is important is that the data is flowing across networks. And that's what allows, that's what actually incumbents don't like. It's not that the incumbents are not important in the ecosystem, but at the same time, when we talk about SMEs specifically, given the title of the talk, it's about them being democratized and being equitable in multiple networks. So I wanted to add that point over there.
Yeah, now that you're talking, so I'll just come back to you with your company. When it comes to you being an open digital ecosystem, right? How are you helping micro, small, and medium businesses?
Yeah, so the first step of that is we subscribe to the same opinion as ONDC. In fact, we are their first international connect outside of India. So buyers on our platform can actually search and they will get results even from the B2B ecosystem in India, which basically means that if a new platform comes alive in India, they are connected to ONDC, they automatically get turned on in our platform as well. And that's the ecosystem of discoverability for SMEs that's important as a first step. But that's easier said than done. The fact is today, SME verification or business verifications for smaller companies, mind you, we are not talking about large listed firms or large SMEs which are already heavily banked, but we're talking about the smaller players playing a role in the global trade ecosystem. Most of them, verification of them itself is difficult. So before we get to data-driven, we have to have some sort of correct data or clean data. But our platform approach is that we basically provide the SMEs with a trusted credential, which is verified and verifiable in technology terms. And that becomes the credential with which they approach trade ecosystems or financing ecosystems. Two major parts that SMEs need to survive and grow. Financing only comes when there is trade. Similarly, financing is enablement of trade as well.
Thank you. I'm coming to you, Jeremy. Now, taking on to what Saurav has said, you're in payments, right? So what is your company doing to help SMEs expand their reach and access new markets?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so if I could weave the two narratives from ONDC and Proxtera itself with the concept of data and what we do in that context. So we are a partner of Proxtera. So through Proxtera itself, we actually do access the ONDC database. So from that perspective, as a payment company, we're not into lending. We know Proxtera in financial inclusion, trade financing corridors do that. But for us to be able to move funds and for even trade financing companies to finance a trade, there are a couple of things that need to fall in place. From a very basic banking perspective, they need to know who the customer is. KYB is one. But now it's gone to the element of KYT, and not know your taxpayer, as we mentioned, but know your transaction. So exactly what the trade is for. So for financial inclusion and for financial services to literally hit MSMEs and to hit a wider base, we need to have transparency and being able to get data, whether it's from an ONDC element, from a marketplace element, from logistics bill or laden element. If we get all, not if, as we get all this data, we create a data-rich environment for financial services firms, not just domestically, but internationally, to move funds, which is what we do, and that's where the role we play. We help them move the money. But I think it's just a step towards trade financing. It's where international capital can reach developing markets, where financial services are sometimes not as efficient as they want it to be. And there is a role to play in a very simple way by bringing data transparency, data collection, and to ensure data is shared in the financial ecosystem so that we can tap on global funds to play a constructive and productive role. And there has been, as this is a regulation stage, as I'm just staring at that there are work ongoing. I think I will make a shout out for Asia in terms of ASEAN. There's a digital economy partnership agreement that we have here, a framework agreement that governs data in transit, data privacy, and all trade-related data that can be exchanged in a benign, helpful manner that will drive financial transactions. I think where we play is a very small role. We move the money, but for us to move the money, we need to know that we are doing it legally. And as like I said, I'm sitting in front of a regulation stage. And data and rich data helps.
Yeah, so you have to make sure that you're legally obliging and following the regulation, accessing and distributing the
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now, as a banker, what role is the CBG playing in terms of helping SMEs? So based on what all the other panelists have said, how different are you in terms of providing the services that you're providing, and what makes you a good partner? So, trying to combine them together to see what it is that you're providing to enable small businesses to get access to markets and also encourage data-driven financial services.
Thanks, Mother. As a banker, my regulators expect me to do KYC for my customers. My regulators expect me to do good compliance on the kind of transactions that I'm going to do. And with this comes a challenge with SMEs, because most of them are not as structured like corporates, because they have bits and pieces of data sitting here and there. So what we have done since we started working with Proxtera on the Universal Trusted Credentials is to start asking ourselves that question. How can we get clean data without the physical interaction or the call on the SMEs themselves to bring in this kind of data. If you come to Ghana, where I am from, you're going to find that there are various entities which holds mountains and mountains of data. But this data is in silos. Nobody else can actually interrogate or use that data. So what we have been working on, and we are on a project which is very, very promising because it is a trusted corridor between Singapore and Ghana on the SME levels, and we want to expand it to places like India, is to start talking to these keepers of that data so that we can use the modern technologies of APIs, and as such, we can start interrogating that data so that all the SME needs to give me is their registration number. And if I go to Ghana Revenue Authority, immediately I can get a certificate of compliance without the need of the SME going there. If I am talking of validating that information of the incorporation, I go to the company house and immediately pull out that certificate directly from the provider. What does this do? What this does is that the more data points I get or data portals that I dip into, it start me validating that SME, and in the end, the data that have corrected tells me this is a good SME to fund. And so now what I'm left is with what Jeremy called KYT. How good is that transaction they are bringing, rather than starting from scratch again to say, do I need? And what happens? What happens, and we had a very interesting conversation yesterday in the Insights. Cambodia was giving an example of how do we validate the supplier in Cambodia who is supplying rice to the supplier in Ghana is good enough to be validated. But if I have that universal trusted credentials in a database that is singular, that is almost open banking, then the guy in Cambodia can hook onto that and get those details and say, the supplier he's supplying in Ghana is trusted. So is my supplier here. And as such, when he's doing the funding, he's sure the funding on the other side is coming through. So what it does is, it starts off as very heavy lifting to clean that data. And for those of us who have dealt with data and data modeling, we are going to realize that it's not the lack of data, it's the structure of that data. Is the collection of that data and put it in a format and in a form that can be used globally by anybody who wants to trust the SME that you have onboarded.
Right.
So Thairu, I'll just make one point because you pointed out India specifically. All DPI initiatives in India are open sourced. Every single API specification that India has exposed as DPIs are open source. It's all available. Some of them are in GitHub. Some of them are in specific developer portal. So much so that at least 2 countries in Africa have actually downloaded these specifications and created a system of their own, very similar to what India has done. And I think I completely agree with what Thairu said about, and in fact, all the panelists have actually gravitated towards the same point. I think there are 2 very important themes around which the MSMEs will have to be serviced. One is enabling them. How do you enable them? You basically provide them the technology, you provide them the standards, you provide them with resources, whether it is financial or operational resources, and then there is facilitation. When you say facilitation, can we create data rails where you have standardized, well-annotated data available for somebody to make decisions while reading the data? And that is where I think Thairu mentioned around creating proper structures of data. And this is where the standardization is the most key element when the data transaction happens between 2 related parties without anybody in central, because the moment you bring centrality, right, at some point in time you'll end up creating concentration which enhances the rent-seeking behavior, and there are capacity constraints as well. Not always, it is mal-intentioned. There are capacity constraints. I can only go to a certain level, and after that I'll start creating entry barriers so that new people cannot come in. So I think the key aspect that I feel basis, what we are hearing and what has been our experience also in India is to enable the MSMEs and facilitate them to be able to transact in an open forum, whether it is open banking, open transactions, or open operations.
But doesn't that then start with digitization of these SMEs? Because majority of them are not even on the digital aspect. So,
Absolutely right, Martha. So, today, if you see most of the MSMEs, and at least in the, in some of the country, and it is and in my country as well, right? The digital evolution is very, very wide spectrum. There are people, there are businesses which are far more evolved in the digital spectrum, right? But there are some people who are not even digitally initiated. And that is where these innovators and the technology platforms, and there are a lot of people who are working in that space. There are people who have created a video frame-based catalog creation. You have a shop which is completely undigitized. You just run around, create a video, and put it in a processor. It will basically give you a digital download, which is automatically incubated into their the POS system. So some of these innovations will actually bring them on board. Will also create awareness around technology, and I'm sure MSMEs have no choice but to approach the digitization in a very, very revolutionary way.
Just to add to that, you're going to find that in this process, what we do is because of the different nature of digitalization, some of them, and generally across Africa, and in Ghana in particular, every person holds a phone on their hands, more than holds a PC on their desktop. So what we are trying to do is to start with a very, very basic way of onboarding that SME. And we engage them on digital education, where we take them through what it means to be digital and what is going to help. And in the end, we give them accreditation that they have taken that education as one part of the onboarding. The next one is to put a platform which we are working with the Development Bank of Ghana, and that platform is to ensure that all accounting is in place. So all they do is they don't have to spend any money because they come in different sizes and shapes. Some of them are mama and papa on a corner shop. Others are already manufacturing. So they come in different sizes. And what we do is we make sure for every one of them there's a solution from an accounting perspective. Some of them do not have inventory control. How much do they know? How can you, as a lender, be in a position to know whether the turnover is good enough, whether that working capital they are working for is really called for, and whether the size of the ticket they are talking about is the actual size that they do need. Maybe they need more or they need less, but they are not able to determine that. So we are also helping them by onboarding them onto accounting platforms that start collecting this data. And we use this data progressively to give them more and more funding.
Thairu was just trying to get more underwriting done and securitize it. So I don't share the same optimism of, or position of optimism of SMEs being digitized enough globally today. We have worked with quite a few countries, and actually even in Singapore, it's not 100%. It's above 50%, but it's not close to 100%. If you go to a lot of the emerging markets, developing countries, it's in the low teens, 20% and so on. So none of what we spoke about in this panel so far precludes the need for digitization, which is best done locally, best done with local entrepreneurs. But if they follow the approach of connecting and collaborating through standards and protocols, they become more accessible, discoverable globally. And that then allows them to access services in the form of payments, FX, financing, and so on. So that's still a missing piece, a big part of the missing piece as such. In fact, what Thairu was talking about is we take the approach of basic financial literacy being required for all MSMEs. And that sometimes can become their first digital credential, something that they can go by and express their view that they want to run a disciplined business even. The fact is, in the MSME cases, there's not a lot to underwrite in reality. Or risk is high, but they still need to be funded to go forward. But this is where if they start at the beginning, then it becomes a stack of cards you carry in your wallet like credentials, and it's accessible digitally and verifiable as well.
So building onto that, Jeremy, because you come in when companies are already digitized, because you're moving money. So in a way, that's not a problem you face, or the challenges that the companies, I'm assuming, you're dealing with are facing. So what are some of the challenges that you see when it comes to businesses implementing cross-border payments?
Okay, so not to downplay the concept of digitalization. So I think the panel has touched on, it's not an easy task. And like you said, now with the advent of with mobile phones, it gets easier. But if your accounting system is not ready, if the way you register yourself is not tidy, the component parts that would form credible digital credentials gets iffy. Yeah? So if we take it from the basis of this is the data we need, and I think there's a lot of good work done by UNDP, and I'll make a plug out for the Universal Trusted Credentials, which is basically, I think, the Rolls-Royce of digital credentials. And if you move down from that standard, so from there are reference standards that global financial institutions will follow, they will adopt, or they will accept. Yeah? So we start from there, and then from there, how do we breach from the standards that we need all the way down to the MSME's digitalization financial journey? So you're right, we come in at a certain point where there is a certain level of digitalization already. That's when you can access global markets, cross-border payments, and to be fair, it also requires a certain class of SMEs, MSMEs to start tapping global financing as also exporting. And how we play a role is to try to bring those credentials across the entire chain to as many financial partners as we can. As we are a non-bank financial institution. We have partnered banks around the region globally. And we work with our partner banks. These are global financial institutions from Germany, from the US. They're the biggest names. I should be mentioning their names, but you can imagine they're the biggest names in the market. And we work with them. We show them the data we collect, both from a credential, MSME credential perspective, down to the transaction basis. And there has been quite welcome reception from global banks on the data that we have collected, and also gives them confidence to actually say, okay, these are legit trade, that's one. It starts off of whether the movement of funds is legit. But that's the precursor of social financing. Because when they know this trade is legit, they know the sending, the buyer and seller as legit, it goes deeper and deeper down. But that again, you still need to be digitalized. But there is a carrot. There's a carrot at the end of there's like in a tunnel, there's a carrot at the end of the journey. You can tap international financing, trade financing, lending. You can tap global markets in terms of your sales. If there are certain steps that you need to take in digitalization, in certain data that you need to share, and it's a journey. Digitalization is a journey, but it's a necessary journey. And I think where the role we all play is to show them why they do it. And this is like a very boring topic, data-driven financial services with trade. It does sound boring, but it serves a purpose. The more data we get, the more financial funds we can move to as wide and inclusive audience or companies. And that's hopefully the role that we play in this journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I add on to that?
Yeah.
So it's been forever thought that, the reason why banks don't do business with SMEs, not enough at least, is it's not profitable. To acquire a SME customer costs money, and then they have to be verified. It's much easier to do business with a listed company with existing data publicly available and a lot of audited reports and so on. So acquiring SMEs is costly, and the lifetime value, believe it or not, is also quite low. So with these credentials, universal trusted credentials at a global level, or in general viewpoint, a trusted SME coming to the table, the acquisition cost becomes a lot lower, and it allows the bank to do a lot more business as well. At a high level, what is this business worth? Today, the validated number is about a gap in financing for SMEs to be about $5.2 trillion. We were just told yesterday that number has gone to $5.7 trillion. But if you talk to people in the business, that number could be triple that as such. Taking a spread of 2 to 3%, that's a few $100 billion business. So that's the business that we want to bring to the front by SMEs being accessible by financial institutions for banking and services, payments, transfers, FX, and so on.
Yeah, thank you. So I think then it's very important for your organization as a regulator in terms of enabling this to happen. So what role do you see yourself playing, and also how can you collaborate with different players to make this possible for SMEs?
We have already collaborated with Proxtera, right? And these digital rails. So one correction that I'd like to make, ONDC is not a regulator. We are in the role of facilitation and enabling. And that is the key theme for ONDC. Our idea is to write protocols that will ensure that there is a wide-reaching impact of the protocols that we write. It is domain agnostic. So today the same protocol that we are using to do B2B transactions can actually use the same protocol to do financial transaction, right? And that basically gives a complete, cycle where you are making a purchase for a raw material from particular buyer for the manufacturing that you want to sell to the seller. Can you also add the financial mix into the same transaction? And that is the whole idea about enabling and facilitating. But I think one point that I want to make specifically, which probably all of my colleagues here touched upon, and I want to just clarify. I think the whole aspect of all data at one place, right? Everybody wanting the same copy of data for their authentication and authorization purposes is not a scalable model, right? What will happen, and I always take an example of what happened in India. So there was basically a UPI flow, which was the payments flow, but there was an Aadhaar flow, which was an authentication flow. Now the connection between these two, the banking transactions and the Aadhaar, was only about whether this particular person is a valid holder of an Aadhaar card or not. The answer was yes or no. Do you really need to download the whole eKYC data and keep it with you for you to be able to lend? Answer is no. And that is exactly where the open banking that both Saurav and Thairu talked about actually will come to the fore, where not all data is required to be at one place, yet I'm able to do an authentication and able to find enough information to build trust and then make sure that this a particular transaction is valid or not valid. So, in those terms, as ONDC will continue down the path of enabling and facilitating the SMEs, as well as large players also, because the moment you have, because there are all varieties of users in the space, right? There are people who basically do not want to deal with the large volume, large scale products, but they still want to be in the market. They have options to do that. They have a very specific segment they want to target and sell their products. The same protocol will provide that interface. Similarly, there is somebody who actually wants to scale up and do millions and billions of dollars of transactions. Absolutely, please come and then start using the protocol, and you are able to connect. And that is where the level playing field for everyone who wants to be active in the network actually gets created. And this is a true democratization of the process. So network basically runs more in a participative sense, rather than as a, more of a regulator sense.
Interesting. So then we come back to you as a banker as well. Saurav mentioned that, financing SMEs is not an interesting enough opportunity for a lot of banks. So what is the bank doing to sort of attract more customers from SMEs and micro small businesses as well?
When you talk about MSMEs, it's a wide universe there. And as bankers, we tend to go for the niche, which is where there is a lot of spread, there is more business coming in, and there is less heavy lifting. But we are going down further. And what we are saying with a project that is encompassing for the Ghanaian economy is for, and Ghana, 90% of the trading is through these SMEs. The bigger structures are not that, as you find in the Western world. And so you're going to find, as you go deeper, like Saurav said, the financial education is low. People don't even look at what is my profit. It's I sold. I can go buy. And so when the pot is getting smaller and smaller, they don't realize is the way they are doing business. So the first thing is financial education, to make sure they understand all the concepts, and even to understand for the bank to fund you, you at least need to meet these requirements. And that is what we are working on very, very hard with the project we are working with Proxtera, which the first thing is financial education to these SMEs. And then thereafter, we layer it with digital education.
Okay, so you are, but in a sort of, you're going down now to also outside your niche markets. That's good to know.
Yes, we are going further down our niche market. We have the biggest SMEs, and yet we have the man and woman along the street who is importing from China, who is importing from India, who is importing from everywhere else, because Ghana is very much a trading economy.
That's very.
If I may add to that, of course, Consolidated Bank of Ghana is our first partner in Ghana, and happy to announce that in the last 2 weeks, the first loans using the platform have actually gone out to SMEs. And it's meant to be inclusive, so these are probably the first time those SMEs or MSMEs get a first loan as well. And that's on the expansion.
And it's good to mention that that whole process we are doing, we are trying to use technology as much as possible. The first pilot that we did, the sandbox we used is actually the regulator sandbox. So the regulator is in the middle of it, is understanding and has breast the whole product, and it's now going to be rolled out to all the other financial institutions in Ghana.
That's interesting. So we're talking a lot about data and collection and data points and measuring, but there's also the concern of the privacy, because everybody getting access to all this data, there's a lot of concern in terms, do these organizations or these service providers need access to this data in the first place to provide the services that they're providing, right? So I'll just throw it out to anybody. What are your thoughts in terms when it comes to data privacy?
It's a very important element in the whole chain. As I said, standardization and democratization of information on top of standard frameworks is the way forward. That will also pave way for protection of data privacy by means of avoiding any concentration of data at one place. The only two transacting parties will basically have data amongst each other. You look at email as an ecosystem, right? You have an email ID on Hotmail. Your email will continue to remain on Hotmail. When you send an email to Gmail, the only person who has access to that information is the person who's on the Gmail inbox. Of course, Google has a different reputation. I don't want to go there. And that is this whole peer-to-peer transactions where the only parties, related parties who are transacting will have exposure of this data is important element. As much as we standardize this information through standards, protocols, and I keep saying this again and again, the way forward is standardizing this whole framework to make sure the related party transactions can happen in the same grammar, right? They don't have to rewrite or reduplicate the data and create multiple copies of data across multiple data stores. I think it's a very important element to make sure the data privacy and data privacy concerns are taken care of. We have GDPR anyway, active at the moment. India has recently enacted DPDP. It is becoming more and more important, right? So data privacies and the secure, cybersecurity framework around data and data assets is an absolute imperative. The only thing, and one of the most important element besides everything else, I see, avoid concentration of data at one place.
If I could chime in on this one. So I think data, from data privacy angle, I think to reiterate the point, it is important. So from a regulatory standpoint, obviously, he mentioned GDPR. I think in this region we have CBPR. And then under the ASEAN, again, digital economy framework, there are frameworks governing data privacy and data in transit. But this is the one thing we'd like to make as well. Banks are not advertising companies. Yeah? They're not supposed to be anyway. So if you imagine from a data collection standpoint, there is a certain degree of consumer protection and privacy concerns that definitely legitimately amounts to the consumer. They want to keep as much information to themselves because they want to market to. That's fine. And they can and should be able to opt out in all kinds of advertising, promotions, social, data collection agencies. I think that's a very legit concern, and the privacy of the consumers have to be respected. But for financial trade, to know the legitimacy, to know you're not money laundering, to know the money you move is legitimate, there will be certain discretions that will allow financial regulators, I would use the word regulation again, to demand transparency in your data, to know exactly how, who, why, who you're paying. But again, I start off with this case, banks are not marketing agencies. They're not collecting it to sell you something, but they need to know money laundering, anti-terrorism financing, prevention of a lot of fraud. All this information, as things get more digitalized, there will be a bifurcation of thinking hats, privacy, to protect the legit concerns of consumers. We don't want your data to be bombarded to every single advertising agency out there. But literally, because things are digitalized and fast, and if there's another forum that talks about real-time payments, and if you can imagine, in 1 minute, your money can flow around the globe 60 times. The need for data and the demands for regulation to have transparent and good, fresh, legit data will grow. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a conflict, but that will definitely evolve that way. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're running out of time. I mean, we can talk about this for a long, long, long time, but I'll just ask you to sort of summarize what you want the audience to take home with, and any useful information for SMEs who might be in the audience. So I'll start with you.
Are there any SMEs in the audience? No. Well, that's one thing that's important. We have to include them in a lot of these conversations, of course. But I want to leave the thoughts of collaboration. At the end of the day, a lot of tech exists, a lot of technology exists, but we have to be open to collaboration. So Proxtera also stands on the shoulders of giants to make things happen, like the other colleagues at the table over here. But we should be open to collaboration a lot. And from a regulation perspective, there are two ways in which these standards get set. Either it gets set and people follow, which usually does not happen, or rather it coagulates towards an outcome that takes the path of least resistance and most outcome. So that's why collaboration is very important. Thank you.
Thank you.
From my point is SMEs need us as banks. And what we need to do is, with the advent of technology changing every day, we need to look at how to use this change of technology to include more and more in the financing of their transactions, of their businesses, of their working capital.
Jeremy.
If I have to say something simple, I would say help is on the way. You see, because as regulations are tidying up, and we can expect it getting tighter and tighter, and to an SME, it might look as if it's a start or at the beginning or in the part of a journey whereby there are a lot of regulatory impact that's going to affect them. When we say help is on the way, there are a lot of fintechs, I'm not just talking about myself, there are a lot of fintechs out there trying to crack this problem, trying to figure out how you can onboard quickly, how they can give you access to financing, cross-border payments, how you can, as much as possible, enable SMEs to digitalize and to access global financial services. So help is on the way. I mean, that's why we are here in Singapore FinTech Festival. There are multiple festivals around the region as well. And technology will play an increasing role in helping financial inclusion, and for SMEs to pay attention, really, that technology will be a major enabler to your success. Yeah.
Thank you. And we finish with you.
I'll try and do justice in the last 20 seconds. I think it's about now thinking beyond platforms. The world needs to evolve from platforms to networks. We see smaller organized networks, by creating an ability of making these networks talk, will bring in huge potential for the MSMEs as well as for the financial industry as well. And I think that is where I see platform to network.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. If you want to get more information, please feel free to contact them after the panel. So thank you very much, and have a good evening.